Thank you very much indeed. I would like to call up our plenary members now to take their seats, please. Because on this conference we are right going into the weeds on our special forum, which is called European Security and Defense, Lessons Identified from 20 Years of Afghanistan Engagement. Many of us here in the room have spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, may it be on the military side in ISAF or Resolute support, or in governmental organizations or non-governmental organizations trying to make Afghanistan a better place. What we want to do in this forum is to perform a reflection of the engagement of the international community, especially UN, Europe, NATO, and in Afghanistan. The general question is, did we do the right things in Afghanistan, and did we do the things right? And here are the forum members. Dr. Hans-Gert Pöttering, our previous Congress president, really does not have to be introduced. The former president of the European Parliament and the representatives of European affairs in the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, your biography, sir, was recently published. It characterizes you as senior expert, historian, and most of all, the European continents. You have led us through 2 security conferences, sir, of which one was the fully digital conference in May. A very warm welcome, sir. You will chair the forum. Ms. Ambassador Claude-France Arnould is a senior advisor on European matters of the French Institute of International Relations, former French ambassador to Belgium and former chief executive of the EDA. Claude-France Arnould joined the French Institute of International Relations in September 2020. She's a former student of the École Normale Supérieure and the National School of Administration, holds an aggregation of classical letters and a Bachelor of Art and Archaeology. She's a graduate of the Institute of Political Studies in Paris. Our Congress member president does not have to be introduced again. He is fully engaged in his former times in Member of Parliament in the German participation of the Bundeswehr in Afghanistan. So he'll also join. It's time to introduce also a good friend and comrade of me and a highly skilled and experienced general officer from the German Army. Lieutenant General retired Carsten Jacobson is a tank officer by profession. He attended the German and British Staff College, was battalion, brigade, division commander. He was military attaché in Washington. His operational tours include S4, K4, and 2 full 1-year tours, one as NATO spokesperson and later deputy commander from ISAF and Resolute support. His last appointment was Vice Chief of the German Army. General Jacobson, Carsten, a very warm welcome to the forum. A great supporter of the Berlin Security Conference and also Congress President in 2018 is Professor Ioan Mircea Paşcu. Professor Paşcu was Vice President of the European Parliament and Coordinator for Security and Defense. Before 2007, he was observer in the European Parliament. From 2007 to 2017, Mr. Paşcu was also Vice Chair working on CDSP matters, including as reporter to EU's CSDP, mutual defense and security clauses, and the strategic situation in the Black Sea. Since 1990, he has held high political and public office positions, including a Minister of Defense in Romania in 2000 to 2004, contributing substantially to the administration and admission of Romania into NATO. Sirs, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very impressed by this special forum, which gives us much to share in discussions for the future. Thank you, Dr. Pöttering, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the forum. We will remain seized with the matter. You have the word.
Thank you so much, General Wolski, for your introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, we are good in time. We are early, so normally we are late or people are late. And we once had a German president who said there are people who are not punctual. They are too early, so we are in this situation now, and we have more than 1 hour for our discussion. And if General Wolski agrees, we have not spoken about it. If the time allows us that you take the floor as well after our discussion here, I would welcome this, and you can ask questions or make your comments. I will not make an introduction by myself, but I want immediately to start with the opinions of our panelists. And I start with you, and I will ask this question to all of us here. And I will start with Madame Arnould. What was in your mind, in your head, when you saw the pictures from the airport in Kabul? What did you think?
Of course, it was an emotion, but it should not have been. We should have known what will happen. It was said, well, perhaps a few days before expected, but I think the Americans were rather clear about their intentions. I think the trauma, because it was a traumatism, nevertheless, was that after 20 years of war, and a war that encompassed so many components, the main world power, the United States, with all the military power coming with it. A very large community. I remember when I was, not in EDA, but before in, well, as head of a directorate called Defense Issues or Defense Matters, attending the ISAF meetings in NATO as EU guest, to see all those countries around the table, the effort, the commitment, the number of allies, well, more than the allies, the number of participants to ISAF, and also what was expected from the UN, from the EU, and the tremendous effort, whatever can be said about corruption or difficulties, internal difficulties in Afghanistan, what was paid by the Afghans themselves, and particularly by the Afghan soldiers. And I think many of us thought that it was not very fair to say that they didn't fight properly. I think they fight as they could, and it's very difficult to fight when you know that the conclusion was an agreement between the United States and the Taliban. Then I think it was a shock. Now, I don't know how you organize it, Dr. Pöttering, if you want now to say why it should not have been a surprise. It can be done later, as you wish.
As you wish. Merci, Madame. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much. And Madame Arnould, and I will ask now the President of our Congress, Wolfgang Hellmich, what was in his mind when he saw these pictures.
Also ich sage mal mit meinen Worten, weil ich das so besser ausdrücke, es war das nackte Entsetzen über das, was wir an Bildern dort gesehen haben. Und wir konnten uns sagen, oder ich habe mir gesagt, wir haben es kommen sehen, aber dass das in einer solchen Geschwindigkeit in dieser Situation endet, haben wir nicht geahnt. Und die Verzweiflung entstand auch an der Stelle, wo wir feststellen mussten, wir können auch nicht wirklich viel dazu tun, um alle Probleme, die wir dort sehen, die menschlichen Probleme, lösen zu können. Wir haben im Verteidigungsausschuss im April in der Pressemitteilung konsentiert unter allen Parteien aufgefordert, die deutschen Ortskräfte sofort aus Afghanistan rauszuholen, im April. Das hat uns eine Menge Kritik eingebracht, so nach dem Motto, das könnt ihr doch nicht sagen. Unser Lagebild war, ich glaube, im Verteidigungsausschuss selber ein anderes, als es andere hatten, weil wir hatten das Lagebild, es wird die Situation nicht zu halten sein. Und es wird schneller gehen, als uns das viele gesagt haben, die gesagt haben, das geht noch ein halbes Jahr, die afghanische Armee hält noch bis dann und dann. Und wir haben gesehen, aufgrund unseres Lagebildes, das wir uns erarbeitet haben, das stimmte nicht. Und deshalb haben wir gesagt, rausholen, so schnell wie möglich, weil sonst werden die Menschen dort den Taliban ausgeliefert werden. Und glauben konnte man den Taliban und ihren Aussagen, die sie in Doha und sonst wo gemacht haben, auf gar keinen Fall. Das hat man historisch gesehen, dass das nicht stimmte. Aber am Ende war es dann der Schluss daraus, aber auch zu sagen, wenn wir zukünftig als Europäer, Deutschland alleine kann es nicht, als Europäer in der Lage sein wollen, in einer solchen Situation auch wirksam eingreifen zu können, dann müssen wir eine ganze Menge tun. Dann müssen wir die Fähigkeiten entwickeln, dann müssen wir sie haben und dann müssen wir vor allem den gemeinsamen Willen entwickeln, in solchen Situationen auch handeln zu können. Und das ist eine große Herausforderung, die ich glaube, als eine Konsequenz auch für Europa da steht, neben vielen, vielen anderen Fragen, was die Lage in der Region angeht, die diplomatische Vorgehensweisen, was ist mit Nachbarstaaten und. Alles ja, gehört alles dazu, aber vor allem auch die entsprechenden Fähigkeiten entwickeln.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Präsident Hellmich, und Ihnen noch einen herzlichen Glückwunsch, dass Sie wiedergewählt wurden in den Deutschen Bundestag. Nicht nur für Sie persönlich, sondern nach meiner Einschätzung ist es außerordentlich wichtig, dass wir auch in den nächsten Jahren verteidigungspolitischen Sachverstand im Bundestag im Allgemeinen, aber insbesondere auch in den Regierungsfraktionen haben. Und als jemand, der nicht zu Ihrer Partei gehört, begrüße ich außerordentlich, dass Sie wieder dem Deutschen Bundestag angehören, weil dieses doch zwar nicht eine Garantie, aber doch ein hinreichender oder ein hoffentlich hinreichender Beitrag ist, dass die verteidigungspolitischen Fragen, gerade auch die Stärkung Europas, bei Ihnen in guten Händen ist. Insofern für Ihre Arbeit in den nächsten 4 Jahren im Deutschen Bundestag viel Erfolg. And now, Vice President and former Defense Minister Ioan Paşcu, we were colleagues in the European Parliament. I had the honor to be a normal member of the Foreign Affairs Committee when you were Vice President of the Foreign Affairs Committee. So what was your impression when you saw these pictures?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss a little bit about this situation, because it is an important situation, as we discussed in the board. And as I was defense minister when it happened, and I was in charge of enlisting Romania in the forces, in the countries, you know, which should participate in Afghanistan, I vividly remember, you know, that the activation of the Article 5, the first time NATO has activated Article 5, was a sign of solidarity towards the United States, which had been hit. And not that the United States would have needed our support, but it was a sign of solidarity, and at the same time it had been a demonstration that the alliance was working. An attack against any member would be considered an attack against all. And that was the basis for our entrance into Afghanistan, although at that time Romania was not a member. I think, you know, that what has happened afterwards was, and correct me if I'm wrong, the United States have not consulted the allies present in Afghanistan either when they opened up the talks with the Taliban in 2015, 16, and here I make a parenthesis. I remember that in this forum, at that time, it was held in a different venue. I said we entered to eliminate the Taliban, to push the Taliban out of power, and we end up by bringing them back in power. How do we define victory under the circumstances? Well, that was a rhetorical question, and I think still is. But essentially, there was also no consultation when the date has been brought forward with respect to the withdrawal of the United States from Afghanistan. And that at a time when we all know, and we are all in agreement that NATO is the supreme forum of transatlantic consultation. And if we do not have consultation when in such operational matters, then, you know, here we can interpret as we wish, but essentially we have to honor this consultation. I believe, you know, that this has been this has had an impact on the mutual trust between the two sides of the Atlantic. Also because it came after the years of the previous administration, which was, shall we say, relatively cold towards transatlantic relations and towards the Europeans. We were seen in Washington at the time more as commercial competitors rather than political and military allies. And then it came, you know, the hope, which has been rightly created by the new administration. And then, you know, we had this moment. I think, you know, that I would not, the consequences, there will be tactical and strategic consequences. The tactical consequences would be, I would not be surprised when I would see reluctance on the part of the allies to involve themselves into another type of operation like Afghanistan from now on. Let's say, you know, that I believe that we won't be in such a position to really repeat such an experience, but in any case, a certain reluctance would be there, and I would not be surprised if there is. And strategically speaking, I think, you know, this has proven once again that we have to invest more and in our defense and security. Let's not forget that Africa, for instance, is our responsibility, and Africa is creating problems, and we would have to deal with them on our own. So I believe, you know, that this is a sum up of my thoughts at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now to a person, General Jacobson, who served in Afghanistan. What were your feelings, General, when you saw these pictures?
Well, as the only military representative on the board, I'm coming more from the operational side, obviously. What was my thoughts when I saw the first pictures from Kabul, when I saw the 10 critical days, and when I saw a lot of things falling apart that I believed in for 20 years and that I invested my own energy and the energy of a lot of people that I led into. It was a mixture. It was a mixture of sadness, helplessness, and anger, all at the same time. Sadness because, as I just said, 20 years of work that shaped many of us who are here in the room, that shaped organizations, that changed the military environment in particular, were falling apart in very few hours. And the Afghan army and the Afghan police that we trained with so much effort were swept away by those who we always wanted to hold away from power. Helplessness because the shouts from Afghanistan were loud. They came in via people who knew me and said, I know so-and-so and he is in that and that situation. They came on the mail, they came on the telephone. Can you help? Can you do anything? And the feeling of not being able to do anything, not being able to help, followed me for quite some time afterwards. Anger, because of a number of things that were said and a number of things that went wrong. First of all, the comment that it was the military who lost in Afghanistan. We weren't. We were the last ones who were there. We were standing to the last plane leaving, all of our partners, and we got out what we could get out. So the military did its contribution, and in parts it did it alone because the comprehensive approach didn't work in the way that it should have worked in Afghanistan. Anger also when I heard from across the Atlantic that we never wanted to do nation building in Afghanistan, but that it was only anti-terrorist. That is, from my experience as NATO spokesperson, from 2011 to 2012, so at the height of the surge and at the beginning of the drawdown, and as deputy commander, ISAF and then Resolute support, plain wrong. Because all that NATO's effort was in Afghanistan was nation building in every aspect. And it became very clear from the other side of the Atlantic that the difference between enduring freedom and ISAF was never properly recognized. Enduring freedom was purely anti-terrorist. And that came to an end, and it was stated therefore by the American president. But NATO wanted to do nation building, building up the Afghan security apparatus, building up the capabilities, building up democracy, fighting corruption, and helping Afghanistan on its way into the family of free nations. And I hope that those 20 years have left a little trace behind with the youth of Afghanistan, and in particular, I remember very well the young journalists that I surrounded myself with when I was a spokesperson, a hopeful generation, and I hope that the Taliban are not able to stamp out this feeling of freedom that they had. The second anger was the comment that the Afghan army didn't fight and wasn't brave. I've had 2 full years, and only too often the Afghan army stood between me and my comrades and angry mobs. Classical example, the burning of the Korans in Bagram airfield, when it was young Afghan policemen and young Afghan soldiers who were standing with their backs to us against their own people, although they were as angry as the ones who wanted to kill every Westerner who was in the country. They fought bravely, but they were betrayed. They were betrayed by their own politicians. They were betrayed by the system. But to say that they are not brave was plainly wrong, and those were the feelings that I had.
Thank you so much, General, and thank you, if you allow me to thank you for your service you did in Afghanistan, although we had these final results. But I think what you just said, we have to learn the lessons from what has happened in Afghanistan. When I was a young student many years ago, I read a book. I forgot the author of this book, but the title of this book was The Golden Rule of Consultation, and it concerned NATO, the Golden Rule of Consultation. And it has been mentioned already that President Trump, when he made his agreement with the Taliban in February 2020, he did not really consult the Europeans. And now with President Joe Biden, and I think this was a great disappointment, he took a decision without really consulting the Europeans. What are the consequences, President Hellmich, for NATO if our strongest partner is acting unilaterally? What does this mean for NATO in the present and in the future?
Nun bin ich auch Mitglied der NATO-Parlamentarierversammlung, da nun Gott sei Dank ein Schatzmeister. Also ich muss mich ums Geld kümmern. Aber die Diskussionen unter den Delegierten dort und auch unter den Abgeordneten aus allen Staaten waren sehr kritisch, weil sie nämlich unisono gesagt haben, und da gab es kaum einen Unterschied, Konsultationen über das, was wir gemeinsam tun und was Gemeinsamkeit ist, stellen wir uns wirklich anders vor. Und darin liegt ein Problem. Darin liegt das Problem, dass es nicht in der Konsequenz bedeuten darf, innerhalb der NATO die einen gegen die anderen, sondern man muss konstatieren, da gibt es eine Uneinigkeit, an der man arbeiten muss. Deshalb habe ich ja vorhin auch gesagt, Einigkeit ist das, was oben drüber steht und was man auch erzwingen, was man erreichen muss. Und das ist, glaube ich, ein ganz wesentlicher Punkt für diesen anstehenden Diskussionsprozess und den zu führenden Diskussionsprozess über die strategische Orientierung der NATO und was wird sie denn in Zukunft sein? Wird sie ein reines Militärbündnis sein oder wird es ein politisches Bündnis sein? Ich höre viele demokratische Abgeordnete, die viel sagen über die Frage von Werten als die gemeinsame Grundlage und die Grundlage für die NATO und ihr gemeinsames Tun. Diese Werte können aber nicht nur Grundlage für ein militärisches Bündnis sein, sondern sie müssen inzwischen entsprechend in politische Handlung umgesetzt werden. Und deshalb ist für mich die Frage, will die NATO diese Rolle haben und ausfüllen, dann muss sie allerdings auch politischer Faktor an vielen Stellen unterwegs sein. Und das geht über die Grenzen Europas und der NATO in der Tat und faktisch hinaus. Wenn sie diese Rolle haben will, dann sind die Herausforderungen, die sich an jeder Stelle in dieser Welt stellen, alles Fragen, die auch die NATO als an sich berühren, worauf sie politische Antworten geben muss und womit sie sich auseinandersetzen muss. Und im Übrigen, der Cyberraum kennt keine Grenzen. Und wenn man sich damit auseinandersetzt, ist man in einem Raum, in dem man seine Interessen vertreten muss und für die eigene Sicherheit sorgen muss. Und deshalb wird das für die NATO eine große Herausforderung sein, in der Tat all diesen Herausforderungen bestehen zu können.
Ja, ganz herzlichen Dank für diese Stellungnahme. Madame, what are the consequences for the European Union when we see that our American partners and friends are acting unilaterally? And President Emmanuel Macron speaks about European sovereignty. Is there a combination of Afghanistan and European sovereignty? So what is your political and military answer concerning this unilateralism, unfortunately, of the United States?
Firstly, I think the surprise was less strong in France. It was not really a surprise that there is a unilateral position of the United States. And by the way, the evolution of the United States vis-à-vis Europe was already mentioned by President Obama. That even before Trump, we knew that there was a special interest of the United States, and the special interest of the United States was Asia. Well, we had a kind of surprise on the French side with AUKUS, which was a kind of second element after the summer, to see that in this case of relationship with Australia and the UK, there was also a surprise and interest of the United States first, without any, not only consultation, but information. But again, it was not a surprise. Then for, I think, French, even French opinion, because I had the opportunity to meet citizens because of the conference on the future of Europe. It was not a surprise. It's that way. There is an American interest, and they follow this interest, and they have said it rather clearly. Then what we need to do is to have our Handlungsfähigkeit, or whatever you call it. And I think it's not very important to know whether we call it souveraineté européenne or autonomy, strategic autonomy, or Handlungsfähigkeit, which is a really fine words, because it says...
Your German is excellent, if you allow me, Madame, to say.
Of course, it's... Oh, no, my German
Many
is not...
Many Germans cannot say Handlungsfähigkeit.
we really, I think, is the main lesson. Then, afterwards, what should have been able to do in Afghanistan? That is another issue. There is a specificity of, under the control, of course, of General Jacobson, there is a specificity of action in Afghanistan. There is a track record of failures since Alexandre le Grand, failures of regime change or occupation. Then there is a specificity of Afghanistan, but I think there is something on which we should have, we should think and have an in-depth reflection. It's these operations, and it's a very serious issue. Force for good. I very often heard this word in English. A force for good doesn't function. And I think we should not blame the military. The military acted well, and I'm very happy to hear General Jacobson said what he said, because he knows more than I do about also not only our soldiers, but the Afghan soldiers and the Afghan policemen and women, by the way, because we trained women, and we leave them now to Talibans. But I think this force for good did not function in Afghanistan, did not function elsewhere either. I think we have a problem in Libya, and I'm not sure that what we did in Kosovo and Bosnia is a full success. After also decades of presence and decades of international effort. Then I think we should think about that. We bear perhaps a special responsibility also in France, certainly in Germany, but also in France. For instance, Bernard-Henri Lévy played an important role, saying, well, there is something wrong, we must do something. And this idea that there must be, I don't know what is exactly the translation, not even in German, but in English, for intervention humanitaire. You say you mean humanitarian intervention?
Yes.
And that is a serious issue. It does not function. Then I think we should rethink, not criticize our military people, but rethink the way we launch operations. We had operations within the European Union that were small operations that everybody forgot about. We went twice in DRC in support of MONUC, in support of the UN, once with a French command, one with a command from Potsdam, General Firek. We went to Chad because of the Darfur war, threatening to destabilize Chad and Central African Republic. And there was a war against piracy. Again, nobody knows about it, but it functioned. And I think what we should think about is why it functioned. Because it's important also about what we still consider as essential to do in Africa for our interest, in the sake of our interest. And I think it's to do it knowing, as if I may take the military words I learned, with not only a military objective, a military clear end state and date, if possible. And if we can have kind of end date, then we know who will be there afterwards to stabilize and to be a presence that would be acceptable and not be an occupation presence. Again, I'm not sure if you say occupation. Besetzung? To be occupants. And we did it in DRC, we did it in Chad, leaving it either to the UN, but with a very intense cooperation to see how we would do it efficiently, that it's not just we leave and you do it, but how do we leave, how do we prepare you to take the following role. And, if possible, local forces such as African Union. That is, for me, the first lesson. The second lesson is not to say that military operation don't function, that let's go to only civil. It would not function either. I think we need this comprehensive approach, and we need to have capabilities, because I think what we Europeans can do in a region which is not our continent is to enable local actors or UN to do. And then we come to the military word of enablers. We should be able to provide the enablers. Intelligence enablers, but also, of course, military capabilities. That's why I think the work we have to do on capabilities is very important. And I think also we should have proper structures and competencies, expertise to conduct and launch an operation. I never understood why our military staff is not a military staff in the EU. We have a military staff. It was decided more than 20 years ago. Well, let's a military staff be a military staff. Have a military responsibility, not only for non-executive missions, or to consider that in 3 or 4 years we could go towards a responsibility of the military staff to plan, including advanced planning, and conduct military missions. And probably tomorrow we will be faced not with the evacuation of Kabul, because evacuation of Kabul would not have been a mission for the EU. It was American forces here, it was the American chaos. We cannot ask the EU to take a role in such a situation. But we can have tomorrow a very serious and complex evacuation operation. And we should be able to do it combining national responsibility and national expertise, and also a kind of relay following a role of the military staff with, again, we don't have any longer red lines from some member states no longer here, but to say clearly the UK, I'm sorry. Let's have it as a military staff, and let's have the military capabilities with what is done now in a community framework with the Fed, with the Defense Fund, and with EDA to have the proper capabilities, also military capabilities.
Merci, Madame Arnould, and I will ask the question now to General Jacobson. Of course, there is a strong combination between political will. If there is no political will, you cannot have any action, whether it's civil or military. but you need, as Madame Arnould said, you need, if there is a political will, capabilities. And if we, and you said it would not have been the responsibility of the Europeans to evacuate the airport of Kabul, but let's go further. Let's think of other situations. General Jacobson, do you think the European Union, if there is a will have the capabilities to act in such situations in the future? Is this realistic or is this wishful thinking?
Well, I'll start with a quick view to NATO. I think NATO has harmed from what happened in Afghanistan. It has a long-term effect because many of, in particular, our new member states came into the alliance relying on the guarantee of the United States of America under Article 5 to defend them and to take them into the family of free nations. And that unrestricted guarantee has come under question after what happened in Afghanistan. To overcome my boredom as a retired general, I'm the president of the Clausewitz-Gesellschaft, and we just dealt in our last big seminar with the question, global or irrelevant, where is NATO going? Because if we look at the deal with Australia and UK, with Australia and UK of the US and the submarine questions and other things, as highlighted at the G7 summit, as highlighted at the NATO summit, the world is rapidly changing and definitely not a safer place. And the question is, are we an alliance that defends its own interest north of the tropical of Cancer in the Atlantic region, or are our interests actually global, which is more or less inevitable? Can Europe play a role? Well, Europe has to play a role because we have two opponents which are very clearly identified. One is Russia as a pure military threat at the moment, and therefore rightfully in the focus of observation of NATO and also, hopefully, of European nations, because we are attacked on a daily basis. In the cyberspace, in space, we are attacked always to the point where it becomes critical. Lukashenko went to the absolute stop line, and then he reversed. And we will see more and more of that, testing us, testing our will, testing our strength. But Europe has another competitor, and that's China, and that was clearly identified in G7 and the NATO summit. And China is not only a military counterpart, getting stronger rapidly over the period. China is also a competitor in systems, because if I am a leader in Africa and I look at what is the government form that is most efficient, I look at Western democracies and I say, I don't really like that. Freedom of speech and complications and elections every 4 years and I look at the China system, wealth under a very controlled dictatorship, I will find that more attractive as an African leader. So we are in a competition of systems and economically. And then there is a third big player, which is not always our friend, and that is the United States, because they are an economic competitor to us as Europeans. And if European nations believe that between these three main players, individual nations can succeed, not forming a European strong bloc, then that will lead to failure. And I'm afraid that my friends in the United Kingdom will find that out very quickly, that they're a very small player on the global scale when it comes to competition with those three elements that are highlighted. Is it realistic? Well, the two keywords, comprehensive approach and NATO and European defense capabilities, or however you name it, have followed me for decades. And in those decades, they always sounded as the hopeful solution to all our problems. And they probably would be, if we would have a clear, comprehensive approach led by politics and executed across the branches of government. That would be very good, and it would help us to solve problems not only here, but it would help us to solve problems around the world, and it would have helped us in Afghanistan. The other, European defense identity, is also a key word, But we still have a general staff in every single country. We still have, the uniforms are not the problem. We are proving it with the Dutch in the moment, how far you can go. 2 armies, well, actually 1 army in 2 different uniforms, more or less. It is doable, and you can go a long way. But we are duplicating every single effort instead of focusing in specific areas. Air transport capability, strategic reconnaissance, cyber, and so on, where a lot of things could be done. But I've heard these words again and again, and gradually over the years, the belief that we will achieve it without a proper threat is weakening. A threat also helps to bring these things forward, but I don't see that at the moment.
So let's hope that the threat is not too big, but that at the same time, without a threat, we do what is necessary. And I think it's very optimistic that you, as a very experienced general, say we can do it if there is a political will. And I want to ask the question now to Professor Paşcu. If you allow me to give my own position, I'm a strong believer in the Western Alliance, but we saw already with President Trump that the Americans might withdraw step by step or even immediately. And the great disappointment for me is that this policy of President Trump, of course, psychologically it's better with President Biden, but they are acting unilaterally. What are the real consequences for the European Union? What do we need? Do we need now a great discussion about European sovereignty? And Madame Arnould said it's not so important to speak about autonomy or sovereignty, but what is a lesson of the Europeans? I think it's a great danger if the Americans withdraw someone in the future and don't defend Western Europe or Europe, the European Union anymore, and we are not prepared. So what should we do? Preventing duplication of our army systems. So it must be a balance. What is your approach as former defense minister of a European country?
Well, I think you know that we have to put some distance between ourselves and the developments. And let's recognize that the center of attention, at least for the United States, and therefore, you know, for world politics, is moving from the Atlantic to the Indo-Pacific. So this is the reality. The problem is that the United States is trying to respond to that, and China is, for the time being, a challenger in economic and commercial terms rather than in military terms. It comes immediately in the military field, more and more so, but essentially it's an economic and commercial challenge. And the United States is inclined to respond militarily by affecting the security arrangements in other parts of the world in order to strengthen the military presence in the Indo-Pacific. So that does not erase the threat in Europe. I think you know that the problem is, yes, the Indo-Pacific becomes more important, but essentially this does not solve the problems in Europe. And I think you know that from this point of view, you see now that China is more important in the eyes of the Americans than Russia. But still Russia is creating problems, at least in these areas, in the area where my country is located, eastern flank. So therefore, you know, that is a main reason we should make very clear that NATO remains the cornerstone of our security, as it is enshrined in Lisbon Treaty and the European treaties. So I think you know that we should somehow try to see how can we preserve NATO, the functioning NATO, in order to deal with the threats which have not disappeared from this area. 2 other comments. I think you know that Afghanistan is also a blow to our pretense that our values are better and they should be generalized. When I flew first over Afghanistan in 2002, let me tell you that I saw high mountains and valleys between them, and I said, how can we construct, how can we build a centralized state under such circumstances? When only in the springtime and the summertime they can communicate through those, between those two, 3, 4 valleys. I think, you know, that we applied, we tried to apply our model to a country which was not fit, not only in traditional terms, but in geographical terms. Geography creates traditions, not the way around. So therefore, you know, this would be one additional comment to which I said about moving towards Indo-Pacific. But the second comment would be that I see, you know, a tendency that the countries would be more and more concerned with their own problems, with their own interests. This great power competition, COVID, everything is pushing in that direction. So we won't have a stomach for the problems of the others to try to solve. Unfortunately, because there will be a need, you know, for our expertise, for our support, help, whatever. But that would not be there because we are more concerned with ourselves. And I think, you know, that we should take into account this increasing selfishness, this repetition of America first in many, many other countries. And that's why, you know, I said that there won't be a stomach for involving ourselves in operations like those in Afghanistan. So I think, you know, that this would be my answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Paşcu. I would like to open the discussion now to the plenary. If there are any questions and comments, you are most welcome. Who wants to take the floor? Please, sir. Is it...
Walter.
Walter, Robert Walter, from the United Kingdom. Part of Europe. Part of Europe. You can get mine. Come.
On that one.
We are always helpful to the...
Thank you very much. I was very conscious of the couple of comments about the United Kingdom's position and the disaster which is Brexit, which is unfolding every day in my country, which you will not be surprised that I certainly didn't vote for. But I wanted to pick up on a point, I think first from Professor Paşcu, about whether or not there would be the willingness if another crisis evolved, a significant crisis. And I think you, Chairman, and others talked about political will. And there's a sense of weariness at these kinds of engagements. I mean, even now in France, a weariness with the engagement in Mali and so on, and it's certainly in President Biden's excuses for the sudden departure from Kabul was weariness on the part of the American people. You have identified two significant threats in the world, Russia and China. As we speak, Russia is massing troops on the border with Ukraine, and China is flexing its muscles towards Taiwan. If either of those were to turn into a military invasion, do we have the political will in the West, the United States and Europe, to do anything about it, or do we just sit back and impose sanctions?
I think we have to express our political will now to defend Taiwan if it would be attacked. And if we are reluctant to defend Taiwan, and if we say it, this would be an invitation to attack Taiwan. So we should be firm, and especially the Americans, and we should support the Americans that we defend Taiwan. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, are there other questions or comments? I see, please. You get my micro again.
Oh, Many thanks. My name is Rudolf Rentschler from the Liberal. I'm the secretary of the Liberal group in the OECD Assembly. Two questions. How can we get political will in Europe? Is it not necessary to go further in European integrations? We have now the Conference of the Future of Europe. Do we need to change the treaties to go a step forward and even perhaps to a federal state to get Europe? Second, even if we have the political will, have we the military capacities to defend Europe without the United States? For instance, we are now threatened for very quick missiles. We don't have any such. Is it possible to defend Europe without the United States? Have we the capabilities? I doubt it.
Okay, thank you so much. The first question, if you allow me, I will give an answer. And the second one concerning NATO, I will ask President Hellmich. You don't need to have a change of the Lisbon Treaty. If there is a political will, the Europeans can do almost everything militarily if they want. So it's a question of political will. We don't need a change of the treaty. And the importance of the Americans to defend Europe, this is rather a question, if you allow me, to President Hellmich.
Im Moment verfügt Europa nicht über die Fähigkeit, sich selbst und alleine gegen Angriffe verteidigen zu können. Nicht umsonst sind wir in einem Bündnis der NATO und stützen uns auch auf die NATO ab bei der Frage, uns auch in Europa verteidigen zu können. Alleine haben wir die Fähigkeiten in Europa nicht. Wir haben eine ganze Menge Fähigkeiten, aber sie zusammenzubringen und sie auch unter, ich sag mal, eine gemeinsame Führung zu bringen, ist im Moment ausgesprochen schwierig. Wir sehen viele europäische Staaten, die bei der Frage, wohin orientieren wir uns denn eigentlich in Europa, sehr stramm auf Deutschland schauen. Und immer die Frage stellen, was macht ihr in Deutschland, an wen können wir uns denn auch als kleine europäische Länder anlehnen? Das ist nicht nur eine Aufforderung, sondern das müssen wir mit einer Einladung beantworten, dieses auch entsprechend tun zu können. Und wir haben es mit einem Punkt zu tun, den wir in Europa auch klären müssen. Wir haben es mit zwei europäischen, das zählt die Großbritannien eben halt nach wie vor mit dazu, zwei europäische Staaten, die als Atommächte eine weltweite Machtprojektion haben. Das haben alle anderen europäischen Staaten so nicht. Und ich glaube, diese Ansätze, diese beiden Ansätze, müssen wir in einem gemeinsamen europäischen Ansatz zusammenbringen. Ansonsten könnte es dazu führen, dass die einzelnen europäischen Staaten mit jeweils sehr unterschiedlichen Agenden unterwegs sind. Und ich glaube, das muss vermieden werden, um zu dieser notwendigen europäischen Einigkeit zu kommen und die Fähigkeiten, die man hat, auch gemeinsam einsetzen zu können. Sonst wird das nicht gelingen.
Thank you so much, President Hellmich. I was asked to give a very short summary of what President Hellmich has said. First, if I understood it correctly, at the moment the Europeans are not in a position to have an overall defense by themselves. Secondly, there is a demand to the Germans to be more active. And third aspect, that there are two nuclear powers in Europe, that's France and the United Kingdom, and there needs to be a coordination as well between them. I hope I gave the right translation. I'm not a translator, but I hope that it's okay what I said. So the gentleman to the left, please.
Thank you very much for all the presentations. I have a point on your fight against unilateralism. I mean, the Europeans knew since mid-March that even President Biden and his administration was going to leave Afghanistan. I was very concerned that we made a very surprise effect that when he announced that it would be the 31st of August. I mean, this was especially the same issue like the Taliban coming so quickly. I mean, this, if we fight the unilateralism, we should also look where we are unilateral in our European settings. So unilateralism, of course, has to be considered, and we keep together. If I look at the meetings in March at NATO headquarters, it was absolutely clear. Nobody was in doubt that this was going to end. Second point, Ukraine was mentioned. And I say, one of the points that we are with Ukraine, Russia, Europe, where we are, is that the Americans never participated in the Minsk process. The Normandy format missed America. Whether this is due to America or due to Europe, it doesn't matter. It has to be changed to have a better success.
Thank you so much for this comment. Then the gentleman here to the right, please.
In my status as a representative of Taiwan here in Germany, I want to give a short response to what's been said, the supporting words of Mr. Pöttering and Jacobson and so on. We were talking about what kind of actions the EU, the NATO or European should take in Indo-Pacific or in South China Sea and so on. And we know just in the moment since yesterday, USA, Japan, Germany, Australia, and Canada, they are holding a marine maneuver now in this area. So I think the question is not if NATO or European, is NATO capable of join a joint fight for freedom navigation there. The question is not protecting Taiwan from China only. The question is protecting the industries of navigation, freedom of navigation, and the state's interest of the European. So I think NATO, earlier we used to say NATO is no action, talk only, but it's not true. So they are there, they are working together with Japan, with USA, and even Germany, with their frigate Bayern, they are also there. So freedom of navigation is the key word. That's why we call Taiwan TAIWAN, and that means traveling around is wonderful and necessary. It's also useful for the European. Thank you for your supporting words. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this comment, which is very important. When I look into the room, I see somebody, yes, to the right. Please, sir.
You see what it means to be a star?
Colonel Ansari from the previous army of Afghanistan, but I'm now still here as, continue my job as a military attaché in Afghanistan. The first, I want to say to please help the Afghan armed forces who lived in Afghanistan without any support. They are under the threats and pressure of the Taliban. The only things when I witnessed during 3 months, only by words on work, by complaints. I'm sending all of the information about them for my colleagues. The only by words they will helping. Please, the second thing I want to mention, our friends here, the collapse was very clear, from 2014. No one talk about the 2 fraud elections. No one wants to talk about the intervention, directly intervention from National Security Office Afghanistan to the armed forces. No one talking about the weak leadership, about the head of Afghan armed forces. The bodyguard of previous Minister of Defense Afghanistan, Rahim Wardak, became the commandant of 274 in Herat province. The Mr. Wardak, the translator, became the 209 Corps. Mr. Halizai was translator, became the chief of army. I'm wondering, about, this one. The only things I want to require to help, please, the people who lived in Afghanistan without any support, especially our special forces, commando forces. Every day contact with me, I don't have answer for them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, and it's very good to listen to you. Thank you so much. And I saw somebody raising his arms. Please.
Kapitänleutnant Moritz Brake, German Navy and a PhD candidate at King's College London. Thanks very much, and thanks for your very interesting insights. When we look at strategic autonomy of Europe, we have political leadership defining the aims, the ends. We've got the military providing the capabilities, the means that are paid for by political leadership. But when it comes to the ways, how to use them, the operational options, how good are we at presenting these on a European level? Do we have a plan A, B, C for a situation in Mali, for example, which may deteriorate at any moment? Do we have only evacuation plans, or do we have solutions for, reversing coups or pacifying a situation that fails in our full plain sight?
Thank you so much. And I don't see anybody raising his or her arm. Yes, please, sir.
Thank you. Emmanuel Jacob, Euromil. As a kind of follow-up of what Captain said, of course we have this decision-taking process, but as a matter of fact we have 27 for the moment. Don't you think that at this moment where the strategic compass will be discussed and also NATO will discuss once again how to continue in the future, that also we work on this bringing really the military together? I'm not talking about a European army, but much more synchronization, and that at the same moment that these discussions are going on, that, for example, the European Parliament starts discussing again the SAFE project, which has been decided and voted in 2009, if I'm not mistaken, and the European Defence Union, which has also been decided by the European Parliament. Don't you think that this is the right moment to come back on these two decisions of the European Parliament and open that discussion again to synchronize much more our collaboration on the European level? Thanks.
Thank you so much, and we will come to the answers. Is there anybody who wants to take the floor to ask a question or to make a comment? Then the last one. Is it General Wittmann?
Yes.
Oh yes, I thought you would be here, and I hoped you would make a comment. Please.
Yes, I will make a short comment. I teach contemporary history at Potsdam University, and this semester my seminar of all topics is about Afghanistan. I had to announce that already 6 months ago. I keep telling the students what Ambassador Arnould and General Jacobson said in terms of don't blame the military. But the lesson, I think, goes much further, also beyond the comprehensive approach. The outcome in Afghanistan is not NATO's failure, but the failure of the international community, which left too much of the task to the military. And of course we were right in not leaving the Afghans to their fate and helping them to rebuild a state. But toppling a regime is not yet regime change. That is my main lesson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Wittmann. And now I will ask the panelists to make their final statements. They are statesmen and stateswomen, but to make their statements. And we start with the left. This is not a political position, General, but you have the floor first. Please.
Certainly not. We are starting this conference, and by the questions and comments, we are already going through everything that we want to discuss. But this board is about Afghanistan. Coming to the various comments, and I'm very grateful for the comment of our Afghan friend, and all the names you have mentioned are people that I've talked to, and there are names that were in that field that I said made me very sad because I couldn't help, because the calls for help were loud and clear. When we went into Afghanistan, it was straight after 9/11. I had taken over on 10/11, my job as military attaché in Washington, and I understood the initial intentions very well because I felt it in the streets. We swept the Taliban away, and we thought they were gone. But they weren't. They were all over the country. And if you come to the quick downfall at the end, some people had the idea there was a big horde of 50,000 Taliban sitting somewhere in a staging area and then attacking the whole country. They weren't. They were in every village. They were everywhere. That's why it went so quickly. And in parts of the time that we were there, we forgot that. They kept low in the beginning, except from Tora Bora and some hard areas, and the more they realized that our powers were fading, the more they raised. When we had the surge under General Petraeus, it became very clear that we could very quickly get hold of that again and get control of that again. But then we weakened again, and the Taliban grew. They were always there. They were never away. One thing was also away, and that was a clear, long-lasting strategy for Afghanistan. And that goes for the international community. Starting with counterterrorism, then realizing it doesn't really work, we need to do something in the country and build capabilities in the country, we came to the concept of provincial reconstruction teams. That was a policy. In military terms, that was tactic. It wasn't even an operation. I always compared it to settling the west of the United States by building a fort, dealing with the Indians. As long as they are friendly, exchange glass pearls. When they become unfriendly, go back into the fort. And when they become very unfriendly, the 7th Cavalry will come in, and that was the Air Force. That described a little bit what the PRTs were, and every nation had a different concept. The Americans were looking at us and said, you are building huge villages and hospitals, and it becomes a holiday place. We looked at the Americans and said, only 80 people who are doing what I just said is not enough. Anyhow, it was a short-term period. Then we realized without control over the whole country, it doesn't really work. So under the control of the ARC, we took territorial responsibility all over Afghanistan without knowing what that really meant. And that stayed for quite some time. But there was no real strategy of what we wanted to do and achieve with that. And the biggest part of strategy for a country like Afghanistan, after 30 years of war and the stage of destruction it was in when we went in, was to build security sector reform. The whole organization, the whole structure, military, police, governance, and the law in the country, plus all the executive branches. That strategy never really existed over the years. Then we had an endless discussion whether NATO's engagement should be time-controlled or situation-controlled. And Reinhard Wolski and I followed that very, very closely. When there was the clear statement, end of 2016, we will be out. Then that weakened. Then we said resolute support. I think even President Ghani didn't really understand the difference between ISAF and resolute support. Because I was there when we said on the 31st of December 2014, we are going to end ISAF and we're now stepping to the third line. We are just giving you train and advice and assist. And no longer direct support. The first question on the 1st of January was air support, airstrikes against some villages somewhere in Afghanistan where Taliban were spotted. There was no clear line, and the Afghan government could never be certain how NATO would react, what NATO would do over the timeline. And that's part of the problem that led to where we are, and that is political responsibility. With a clear political will and a clear guidance, security sector reform, reach a certain stage of security, suppress corruption and failure of government, it could have been a success. But we gave up different approaches too quickly, didn't send clear signals, and that's what the Taliban very clearly understood.
Thank you so much, General. Now we have only a very few minutes left. Each person 1 minute, like the timing in the European Parliament. Ioan, Paşcu, you are aware of that? Please. And then President Hellmich, and then last not least, Madame Anu.
Thank you, Mr. President, as I would say in the European Parliament. First is, you know, that in Afghanistan, my belief is that we were much more interested in the process itself than in the end of the process and targets which we would achieve or not. The process itself, as long as it went, it was very good for many of us. So therefore, you know, here it is part of the answer. But I would say, you know, that here in Europe, we should somehow try to determine each country, that it is in their own interest to invest in European defense and security. Because it will be inevitably a larger share of our own defense which would come for us in the future. And I don't think, that if we change the rules of the decision-making process, no, you have to do that because this is the majority and so on. It's not, I would say, the right path. The right path would be to convince them that it is in their own interest to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Paşcu. President Hellmich.
Als ich 2012 in den Bundestag gekommen bin, kannten wir im Verteidigungsausschuss den Namen eines jeden Dorfes in Afghanistan. Und jeder Fluss und jede Straße war uns bekannt. Dann kam Syrien, Irak, Mali, Flüchtlingssituation und eine ganze Menge an Problemen mehr. Und zu Beginn des Jahres 2020 oder noch in 2019 hatte ich den Eindruck, kaum jemand weiß noch, dass es Afghanistan gibt. Weil es war aus der öffentlichen Diskussion völlig verschwunden und es wurde auch gerne politisch zur Seite gelegt, weil es so problembeladen war. Und ich hatte den Eindruck, auch andere europäische Partner zogen sich Stück für Stück aus ihrem Engagement für Afghanistan zurück. Und es endete in der Situation, in der es geendet ist. Deshalb ist eine Konsequenz für mich, wenn man auch als Europäer oder als NATO in einer solchen Konfliktlage sich hineinbegibt, muss man sie auch bis zum Ende durchstehen oder man muss sich vorher sagen, ich kann es nicht. Dann muss man seine Kräfte besser einschätzen oder anders einschätzen. Der Bundestag wird, da bin ich mir sicher, das wird wohl auch in einem Koalitionsvertrag stehen, eine Enquete-Kommission oder Ähnliches zu dem Thema Afghanistan einsetzen und vielleicht auch noch einen Untersuchungsausschuss. Auf jeden Fall 20 Jahre Afghanistan-Einsatz untersuchen, in allen Facetten, mit allen Konsequenzen, um Hinweise für das richtige Tun in Zukunft zu bekommen. Das geht nicht mal so eben by the way. Im Moment habe ich den Eindruck, alle können ganz schnelle Urteile abgeben, was alles schiefgelaufen ist oder nicht. Wir müssen ein bisschen gründlicher und grundsätzlicher damit umgehen und da brauchen wir auch Zeit zu, um die richtigen Schlüsse daraus zu ziehen. Es geht nicht so schnell, sondern es braucht Zeit.
Okay, thank you so much, President Hellmich. President Hellmich said that there will be an enquete commission studying the whole situation in Afghanistan all those 20 years, and then one has to come to the conclusion. Et maintenant, Madame Arnould, you have the second last floor now.
To respect the 1 minute and try to respect the parliamentary 1 minute, I think we all agree that the Europeans should be able to act. And we should not wait about treaties, changes. We must act now, and it means capabilities. And it means capabilities, military capabilities, and of course also strong civilian capabilities. And to be strong in any respect, including in economy and the technologies that we need, including for the military challenges. Just one word about the selfishness. I think it's very interesting, but well, states are selfish. Individuals may be different, but states are not charité. I don't know the word in English. And I think well-advised selfishness, it's cynical what I say, is enough to take action, and to take action which is useful and in fact good for the interest. If you take into account your interest in the field of migration, your interest in the field of internal politics regarding migration, if you take your interest including security of supply, economic prosperity, or terrorism, then you have no reason to refrain from action, just the opposite. And then it comes to the same result, but with a clarity in the objectives that suits EU or nation type of action, or NATO, but to know what we do, why we do it, the support we need, the political support we need, and then we do something that can be also in the interest, of course, of local populations, but you know why you do it and you have an objective.
Shall we call it smart selfishness?
Okay, Madame, you mentioned charité. Charité means love, and we have a great hospital here in Berlin, Charité. It's known in the whole world. And I want just at the end say a very few words. It's never too late. And in my 35 years as a member of the European Parliament, I experienced ups and downs. And it's very important, especially after the failure of the European Constitution, first in France, then in the Netherlands, that there is a group of people who want to go on. And I remember that many of my colleagues thought the treaty has failed, the Constitution failed, and we will have no result. But we insisted to have a new treaty, a Lisbon Treaty. And what we need now is political will by our governments in the European Union. We should not always we have the responsibility to criticize the Americans when we have to criticize them, but we should ask ourselves what is our responsibility as Europeans, not always criticizing the Americans, but asking ourselves what we should do as Europeans. And my answer is we have to strengthen the European pillar of NATO. We have to have a European will to act, and we have to do more in the field of military. And the Americans are right with this 2%, and we should use these 2%, the increase of our budgets, for the strengthening of the European pillar. And it was my wish to the new German government that they are not only rhetorically in favor of the alliance, in favor of European integration, but that they give the German army and the Europeans the means really to act, and we have to do it together with our French friends. They are very important, but we should not forget the smaller countries. I was part of a discussion with the former president of Lithuania, Grybauskaitė, and she was just asking us, demanding us, the Germans, to do more in the field of defense because we have this developments in Belarus, in eastern Ukraine, and I think we have to give responses, and not only rhetoric, with our rhetoric, but in practice, and that means, and this is my conclusion, to strengthen the European pillar of NATO, because not as such, but we do it because we want to defend our values, and our values are the dignity of the human being. It's freedom, it's democracy, it's a rule of law, and it is peace. And I think we Europeans, including the Germans, should be responsible now, and this should be our answer for the future. Thank you so much.